Thanks, Christian.
Thank you. I really appreciate this opportunity. And like Clyde mentioned, please feel free to interject or bring up questions. I really want this to be more of a conversation than a presentation. And as you see, I have a handout. And this is something that I hope is helpful that you can refer to after our meeting here. This was written by an intern who's on staff with my company, with Woven. And he is a member of the LGBT community and also is a recent graduate of UCO. He's a philosophy major. And so he deals with ethical issues in his studies, in his academic focus, and also is very active in the LGBT community himself personally. So I really feel good about this piece that he put together, and we collaborated to make sure we covered topics that would be of help to you. And Woven, I don't know if you're familiar with my company, but it was launched in the fall. So we're a startup company based here in Oklahoma City, actually just around the corner from this building. And we're national in scope. And the mission is to provide resources that are within the legal and financial arena to the LGBT community, especially for those people who are living in states like Oklahoma where they don't have rights to marriage and other benefits that come with the rights to being legally married. And so we want to make sure that people have the legal and financial tools in place to lead secure lives, just like anyone else. So that's our mission. We have a network of amazing professionals who work with the LGBT community, including attorneys, financial advisors, CPAs, and insurance professionals. So that's what Woven is all about. As far as my background, I'm originally from Oklahoma City. I'm actually fourth generation. My family's been here since, territorial days. And I grew up in Nichols Hills and really lived in a bubble as a child. I went to Cassidy School, really didn't stray from my neighborhood hardly at all. In fact, my mom wouldn't even allow me to drive on May because she thought May was where people died. It was the most dangerous street in the city. So I didn't go west of Pennsylvania. I mean, I lived a very sheltered life growing up. And when I graduated from Cassidy, I really wanted to leave as quickly as possible because I just didn't feel comfortable here. I didn't feel like there was a lot of opportunity for a young independent woman, and I felt that it was very backwards, and this was back in the early 80s. So I took off and went off to college in Western Massachusetts and stayed away from Oklahoma for about 30 years. And just recently moved back a couple of years ago because my parents are getting older and I felt that pull to come back to be here for them. And but I was hesitant because I really wasn't sure if Oklahoma had really progressed enough to fit my standards. But I've been pleasantly surprised, and as you all know, there are really strong, although pockets of areas where there's progress, it's there. And we are moving towards incredible change at a very fast pace. And so I'm thrilled that there is a resource like Woven that's being developed here in our state, and I think that says a lot about Oklahoma and how much this is needed. And as I've started creating and developing this company and growing it, it's been fascinating to travel around the country and talk with people and make sure their stories are being heard because we have a strong content component on our website. And one of the big areas that I've been trying to dive into is the transgender community because that is largely underserved and misunderstood by so many people, including others within the LGBT community. So there is a lack of education there, and I've really tried to learn as much as I can quickly so that I can help be a voice for that population. And so this piece that I've passed out, it touches on communicating with and for the gay and lesbian community, but then also bisexual individuals, and then towards the end we get into the transgender area. And I actually had coffee yesterday. I spent 2 hours with Paula Sophia. Do you all know who Paula is? I'm sure you may not. Paula Sophia has, she just retired just last week from being a police officer with the Oklahoma City Department. She was out as a transgender police officer for 14 years and has a very long, wonderful career as a police officer, although filled with many challenges, as you can imagine. Originally, as she started out in the force, she was Officer Paul, and she made a transition in 2001 and became Officer Paula. And it was quite a transition for the police force in the city of Oklahoma City to understand and to cope with. And Paula is just an amazing individual, and she's really come a long ways in being able to create and develop relationships with community members and to show that she is an amazing person, an amazing police officer, and that the transgender issue really shouldn't come to play in it. And she just retired so that she can run for House of Representatives. And this is a huge thing for Oklahoma. She would be, if elected, the first transgender public official that I'm aware of. And so this is big news. And so there have been stories out there. And I commented on Channel 4 on a recent segment along with Paula about how excited I am, but I'm also concerned because, you know, I don't know if Oklahoma is quite ready. I hope we are. Yes.
Could I ask you, I mean, I think when we heard about that race or what she had filed for office, there was some comment, I mean, not to get too deep in some of our comments on our website, but there was comments criticizing us for highlighting that, not highlighting it, but at least mentioning that fact and saying, what does this have to do with it? Where obviously it is somewhat newsworthy, so where do you strike that balance of, you know, she had been in the news in the past, obviously, and so there was some history there, but I mean, we should mention that obviously as coverage, but from the outside, it does look like we're somewhat insensitive by even mentioning that.
That is such a good point, and that is a challenge. And I asked her point blank, I said, Paula, how do you feel about the transgender issue being part of your campaign? I said, you know, doesn't it drive you crazy that that is out there and that's usually at the forefront of people's minds? And she said, yes, I don't like it, but at the same time, that's part of who I am. So it is a conundrum, and you know, she doesn't want her issues and her campaign to be focused on that, obviously. I wouldn't want my personal life to be the focus if I were to run for public office. I wouldn't want that out there either. But at the same time, it is news, and it is quite a story, and it does represent change and progress. Just like when, you know, the first African American person took office in whatever state in the South. I mean, that's newsworthy, and that's something that you tend to focus on, even though it really shouldn't be a factor. So yeah, I don't have an easy answer for you. I mean, Paula acknowledged she wished it wasn't an issue, but at the same time, it's part of who she is. So I think the best thing to do as a journalist is to simply ask the person and say, you know, how do you feel about this issue? And I would like to focus on this. How do you feel about this? Because really asking the person what their thoughts are is probably the most effective thing to do. And I suggest that in this paper. I think it's so important to be able to report with compassion. And obviously you all want to do that, or you wouldn't have, you know, set up this meeting. So, but it is very tricky. And one concept that it is kind of a thread that runs through this piece that I've passed out is that gender is fluid, and that's a way of thinking that many people may not be familiar with. That it's very important to be respectful when it comes to a transgender individual of what gender, who they are, and you know, a person may not be presenting as a male, say a trans male, may not be presenting as a male, but you have to respect that he is a he. And it's tricky, especially when somebody's going through a transition and may not be presenting the gender who they are inside. So it can be confusing going on the exterior.
I think like one thing we've struggled with, and I hear people talk about in the newsroom and try to be like sensitive about it. It's like Bradley Manning's a good example of like someone we were writing about as a man, and then Bradley Manning decided that Bradley Manning was Chelsea Manning. and it was saying like all these news organizations are having this conversation about what pronoun do we use here. And I think that's what, we're word people. So I think one thing that, you know, I've heard people talk about is, okay, what pronouns are we supposed to use? You know, and I've always been in the mindset you use the pronoun that that person is living their life as. But I know
Yes.
some people who are a little more literal have problems with that.
That's true, and really the rule of thumb, those I've talked with, the transgender individuals, they say, yes, please use the pronoun that who I am. You know, if it's a trans woman, she's a she. A trans man, somebody who's transitioned to becoming a man, he's a he. And you stick with that. Otherwise, I think it's good to just simply ask because, and there's a list of gender-neutral pronouns in this document too, that actually some universities are starting to use, and you'll find, you know, out there in the online world, like University of Vermont students can use the pronoun ze, instead of he or she. So
What does that mean?
it's gender neutral.
Is that a word?
Mm-hmm.
It's in the dictionary?
Well, that's a good
I don't know
question.
if Webster accepted it, you know, not.
Checking.
But I have a list of,
No.
but it probably will be soon. But there's a list of gender-neutral pronouns I've listed in here that might be helpful. Again, it's probably good to ask the person you're interviewing. And if you can't, I would go with the pronoun that they recognize themselves to be.
Not to be, you know, of course, inventing words of our own or anybody else's, but isn't there just a way of writing around it? I know it's tedious to keep using their name, but isn't that almost preferred from guessing or inventing something? In other words, Manning, 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 Manning. You know, I know it gets tedious in the writing, but it seems to me that's sort of our.
Are you saying like in a situation where we didn't know what pronoun to use?
Well, right. Well,
We don't have the style where it's Mr. or Mrs.
we don't
Right.
use that anyway.
So
Yeah.
that-
Right.
that's
And we
not
write lots of
effective
stories.
for us.
We have some writers who use the pronoun all the time to where you can't figure out who the heck anybody's talking about. Then we have other folks who've never heard of a pronoun, you know. So in some cases, though, that's just a good place to be, as opposed to, I mean, I'm all for whatever Vermont's inventing, but I don't think we're there yet.
We don't know what it means here in the newsroom. I think if
Yeah.
we were
We
ever
have an
to start.
audience that reads stuff, and we're not
Right.
doing it for us. And we're also, while we want to be respectful, absolutely be respectful, we have to think about our readers.
That's right, we don't want to create confusion, more confusion.
True.
We also don't want to create division.
Yeah.
If we're just starting to, it's much safer to call about Manning than say, for instance, what if we have a real serious point about somebody? Is it running for council, whatever? And isn't it just easier, neutral, to use the person's last name?
Yeah.
Just seems to be, especially if you're not trying to introduce the question. I mean, are we talking about city council policy? Are we talking about somebody's gender? That's not the issue before us, and it seems like in those cases, last name would be the way to go.
I agree, absolutely. And then you do have to be sensitive to a person when they're changing their name, because sometimes they do want to change their last name as well. And just to be cognizant of that and go with whatever they've, you know, moved to instead of bringing up the former name.
And then Bradley Manning, Chelsea Manning, don't we usually say like Chelsea Manning, who, and then at some point who was previously known as Bradley, isn't that,
Yeah.
or something along those lines?
I would think, you know,
Yes.
That
I
would
think
be
we
how-
make
yeah.
that distinction, yes, at least once in the story. anyway.
just so people know who we're talking about. I
Yeah.
think in that instance, like with Paula, I mean, people are not gonna, people probably know her more as Paula than, I don't even know what her name was before she transitioned, because I just always knew her as Paula. But with Paula's story, I mean, like, you know, I also struggle with like, what's relevant, you know? Like, is it just a reference of who is transgender and then go on with the story? You know, like, what's relevant, do you think, Kristen, when you're writing about someone who, for example, is trans and like telling their story? And what would you caution us maybe to, not say not to use, but to consider whether we are gonna use certain language?
Well, that's a good question. What I've done on Woven in our articles about transgender individuals is I do focus on the fact that they are trans, because I think that is such an important story to get out there, and I talk about the struggles or the challenges they've faced. And so I do, but you know, my audience is primarily LGBT, and so I think that's important to focus on what people are dealing with, how they're coping, how they've overcome issues, how they're being accepted by the greater community. And so I do mention that. I do focus on the transgender part and what the transition's been like. As far as reporting, you know, a story like Paula, like I said, that's a tough one because, I mean, it is big news, and I think it would be amazing to have somebody elected who is in the transgender. I mean, we have to have elected officials who reflect our community, and we have transgender individuals in our community. So it's, you know, it's black and white to me that, yes, I think that would be a wonderful thing. At the same time, I think it's good to make sure that just to ask what Paula feels and how she wants to be represented. And, you know, I just think that's really important. And I do that with my reporting on Woven. I don't know, you know, how, I mean, I know in your world you have to work so fast and so quickly, and you have to get those stories out and focus on what the bite is. So I guess I could ask you, I mean, how would you treat a story about Paula?
Well, I mean, I would say that in a story, if we were talking about Paula running for office, I would hope we would include that she has a breadth of knowledge about criminal justice. I mean, if you talk to her, you know, she knows the city incredibly well, and I'm guessing her part of her platform is about public safety. So I would think that it'd be important if we were doing like a feature about her to not just talk about her transitioning, but also, you know, the knowledge she has from being a police officer, just like we would with any police officer running. So I don't know.
I think it'd be refreshing to see that, you know, as far as a news story, not focusing on the transgender part. She did mention she's written a novel. She's written a couple of books, and she was really trying to push her novel out at one point when it was released. And she spoke with a reporter, and she said she spent a good hour with a reporter, and 90% of the time was focused on the book, and that's what Paula wanted to push out. You know, a small percentage was on Paula and her transition, her personal story, and it turned out the article was all about her personal story and just a tiny mention of, oh, and here's a book. And so Paula was really disappointed. I can see how that can easily happen because that is a big story, you know, her transition and what it was like for her to be an out transgender police officer in Oklahoma City. I mean, that's fascinating. But the story at hand is the fact that she's running for office, and she has so many amazing ideas. She has a wealth of knowledge of the city, and you know, it's just, I mean, she's just an incredible candidate. And I think to get into those issues would be more relevant to potential voters and to news readers. And I think eventually readers would get tired of just hearing that she's transgender. I would imagine. You know, there's more to a person than that. So.
Christian, you mentioned to me about terms that may be offensive or derogatory in a way. You talked about a TV interview where they continually consistently use the term homosexual, homosexual, and homosexual, and homosexual. And I thought, well, how is that an offensive term, or when does that become an offensive term to use, or offensive word to use?
That was actually treated, that was touched on by the New York Times not too long ago, I think maybe a month or so ago, that among the gay community that seeing the word homosexual used instead of gay was offensive because it focused on the sexual part, I guess, or you know, it was more of an older term that's become outdated, and that members of the gay community prefer gay, and they don't want to see homosexual because we don't talk about heterosexual people. Well, he's a heterosexual. You know, we don't do that with people who are not gay, so why would you point out with that particular word that's quite outdated, why would you do that for a gay person? So, you know, typically it's gay and straight, and those are the more accepted terms nowadays. You just don't see, like if I were running for office, you wouldn't say, well, heterosexual Kristen Davis, you know. So, I mean, it's just, you kind of have to think about how it would be for you, you know, what you would want the story to be focused on.
But to play devil's advocate, the thing in your opinion that makes the Paula Sophia story interesting is because she's trans, that makes her unique, and that makes it an interesting story. So if all the straight candidates, that's not unique, so you wouldn't mention it, so it's not an interesting story. I mean, that's kind of a catch-22.
It is. It is.
Is the fact that she transitioned in the public eye maybe more the reason it becomes more newsworthy, though? I mean, you wouldn't necessarily point it out on, it wouldn't be as big of a story maybe for someone else as opposed to because she was a police officer who was a he and then became a she. I mean, is that?
If a candidate just appeared who had already transitioned.
Right.
we
What about
didn't
Brittany
even-
DeBonnie?
Yeah.
I mean, Brittany didn't transition. I'm not trying to be up there. I just,
No.
but that was a big part of Brittany's story that you saw everywhere.
That's
was,
true.
You know, when she was, and she, of course, she was running against Sally Kearns, even more so of the story. But that was very much part of her story too. Was that you saw a transgender woman running for office. So I think it's just whoever is the first has to is just. make
It's
it that
true.
more.
It's true for women. You know, woman running for president. I mean, then it's all the focus on the female aspect. You know, what is she wearing? What does her hair look like? It's all, you know, she's a woman. Is this why she said this? Or, well, is that because of her gender? You know, we just do that. And once we get over that hump and we can see that people of all kinds of people, whether, regardless of their race, gender, whatever, can do the job, that's what we eventually need to focus on as a society, but we're just not there yet. We don't yet focus on what a person has to offer to that job, but we're getting there, we're making progress. But that's the frustration, you know, Paula feels that. She wants people to know her record. She wants people to know that, you know, her character and what she stands for, her issues. But at the same time, she said, yeah, being trans is part of who I am. So there's kind of that.
Precisely. One of the things about the challenge we have now is people can tell their own stories. So how are they telling their own stories? And they're doing it in lots of different ways. They've done it on different mediums. They've done it on blogs and all those things. How are they presenting themselves? And when they're presenting themselves this way, but they expect, and lots of people do this, politicians in general, they want the media to present only this slice of it, but while they're telling their own story this way, there's an advantage and a disadvantage to going first. And it's human nature for us to want all of the advantages and none of the disadvantages. And so I think we have a responsibility to our readers to say, okay, what is it? I mean, yes, we got to be sensitive and nice. Just be nice, for crying out loud. That's a great place to start. And like call people what they want to be called. I mean, isn't that what do what your mother said for you to do is a great deal. But the other deal is we have to discern what our readers want to know. And when it's somebody going first, when it's somebody different, you're telling a lot of audience, like, you're literally saying what transgender is. There's lots of folks that we have to explain that to. So, and for some we have to explain it so you won't think of them as the boogeyman. You know, there's a responsibility that goes with that. So, you're right. It's difficult. It's not easy, but it's simple. It's not easy, but it is simple.
That's true. That's true.
Be nice, tell the story, the context matters. Context is everything. If it's a dais of candidates and we're talking about education issues, and it's me and Jacqueline and Paul and all those, then it doesn't become, then, like, I don't know, I'm an Orioles fan, that doesn't ever come up. Don't hold that against me, we're talking about test scores here. But if all of a sudden it's a portrait or a profile, then it is relevant.
That's true. It depends on the context.
Context matters.
Yeah.
Well, I think also if she's going to be a voice for a certain specific part of the community, you know, wanting to advocate for those people who writes,
Why?
it does become more of a backstory as to why.
But I think what Paula really wants to focus on is the community that she would represent, her
Sure.
prospective constituents. So, and that's not just LGBT, it's just everybody who lives in that area. So, that's what she wants to focus on. But I agree, it does depend, context does matter tremendously. And Paula shared things about her life with me that I will publish on Woven that she may not necessarily want to have in, say, the Oklahoman. So, she wants to, fashion her messaging the way she wants to.
Yikes. You don't get,
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I agree. Well, I think it just depends on the medium, where she wants to have
She's
particular
trying to
parts of her
control it, but
story.
if she's
Is that a
putting it out there,
website?
it's out there.
Woven, yes, we're a web-based company.
Once it's out there, it's out there.
I don't,
Well, I agree. I mean, once it's out there, it's out there. But the Woven website, we have content that's geared towards LGBT audience. Oklahoman has a different audience, obviously, than we do.
Kristen, we had this crazy guy named George Shin. He was the owner of the Hornets. And he would, so remember when the Hornets moved here to Oklahoma City? Well, they moved from New Orleans. And he would come up here and say all these things up here about how much he loved Oklahoma City and wanted to stay in Oklahoma City and wanted the team here. Then we get to New Orleans and he was shocked, absolutely shocked, that anybody thought he was deserting the town in New Orleans, and he wanted to talk a different way there. It didn't work. It doesn't work. People here can get it, and so these segmentations of audiences, that's the flip side for us and you, is like people can tell their story right here however they want, but it's going everywhere. How'd that get up out of here? It goes everywhere, and I just don't think that's very realistic.
Well, my website is not political at all. We wouldn't deal with the political side. So, for example, if I were to do a story about Paula, it wouldn't mention her campaign or what she's doing. It would focus on her transition issues, how she was accepted by the community, what it was like being an out transgender police officer. That's what we'd focus on. What it was like getting married to her wife, Pam. Those issues, the personal issues, because that's what our content's focused on, the lifestyle issues. So, it's just a different context, whereas with the Oklahoman, she wants to reach her potential voter base. She wants to talk about the issues, what she really feels is important to Oklahoma and to, her future prospective office.
We live in a state where we have a newspaper with a prayer on the front page. We have a satanic statue debate. We live in a state where people say, what you stand for, and up and down the ladder of abstraction or from hell to heaven matters. So in that context, that's what people run on. They do. James Langford's trying to get elected to the United States Senate because he's a Christian. People are interested in that. And so what I would ask you is this. Here's a scenario. So Paula is running for office, and one of the stories or narratives is how many people, how's this working? How's her support gaining, right? So she's got to go beyond, everybody's got to go beyond their core. So one of the questions is, how's that working out? Well, to talk about that story, you have to say where she began. What was her original, what's her core? And so there's where it comes in. And what's that core, and what's said on your website is sort of defining what her base is, where she launched her campaign on, just as if some Republican, staunch Republican, was trying to cross over and get Democratic votes. We'd have to say that this Republican candidate was running on, I don't know, school prayer.
Well, look at the Rand Paul newsletter that he completely disavowed. It was the stuff that he was saying to his friends that, everybody was like, but you said this to your friend, but I didn't really mean it. It just doesn't work that way. You just don't have control of the information if it's out there.
That's true. That's very true.
And when people decide to run for office, I mean, if we're describing her in a different context as a police officer, that's sort of different. But when all of a sudden you're saying, vote for me, you folks here, and some of those folks are getting our newspaper, going to our website and saying, trying to figure out who should vote for. That's the relevance of that goes up. I mean, I don't know how we can sort of separate that out. I
That's
haven't figured it
interesting.
out.
Well, yeah, this, she's transgendered and she's transitioned from male to female. I mean, that's a huge story, but we've covered it. I mean, she's been in the public eye for like 14 years. I mean, I think our job too is to broaden the conversation. I mean, as a newspaper, I mean, I would love to know more about her, her political stances and why she's running, and I don't. I just know that she's, the first transgendered,
Candidate.
yeah, that's all I know.
And the thing is, if a reporter stops with that and says, well, yeah, this is our focus, her transgender story, a lot of the readership will not move past that, will not be interested. They'll see the T word and say, okay, I don't understand that, I don't know what that means, and won't even want to read about issues. So I think it's a reporter's job to be able to provide a very well-rounded, story and cover, like you said, all the issues. Why is this person running? What makes her qualified? What is interesting about her campaign? So.
It's not in here to be able to speak to what our general plans are, but in the past we've had just everybody gets the same questionnaire, and a House race would get a ton of stuff, and she'd get the same as her opponent. Sorry, it's not a huge race, other than the thing that makes it unique is the thing that nobody wants to hear about because everybody already knows.
We don't typically profile every race anymore, do we?
Uh-uh.
I mean, we used to do that. We used to do every single race in the
Yep.
state on the state.
That's
rep,
right.
state
And
senate.
this is a House race, it's not.
Yeah, and we don't.
That's right.
We don't do that anymore. We
That falls into the trap of whatever happened to political coverage.
Well,
Not the
like-
paper of record.
We moved beyond it with
discussion.
like Al McCaffrey. I mean, not every story about Al McCaffrey says, who is gay? I mean, like, Al
Right.
McCaffrey talks about all kinds of stuff, and we don't mention it, but I think we're all kind of saying the same thing, like, it is a story.
Well, I guess I'm
but-
talking about the election coverage, like the
Right.
balance issue too.
Right, right. But once, if she were elected, I mean, there would be a point where her being transgender was no longer relevant part of mentioning in the story. Like Kay Floyd, you're not gonna mention every time, who was the first lesbian to be elected to Oklahoma Senate, like if she's talking about streets, So, it's like, and by the way, and you certainly don't mention everyone who's bisexual over there. So.
Well, I just think it's so refreshing when we can move beyond that, like you said, and not talk about whether they're gay, heterosexual, whatever. And so recently, I guess it was really a week ago, the days move so fast, but I went to a fundraising luncheon for Jill Webb, and she's up in Tulsa County. She's running for judge. And if elected to judge, she would be the first open lesbian judge in the state of Oklahoma. So I went to the luncheon knowing only that. That's all I knew. And for me, being, president of Woven, that was a big deal to me. So I wanted to go and show my support and learn about her. And it was just so great to be in this luncheon and have her stand up and speak and talk about these amazing plans that she has, things that I've not heard before. And she's really studied other states that have high incarceration rates like Oklahoma does, and has tried to figure out and looked at strategies that worked to help reduce that in the court level. And she was fascinating, and I was so taken aback and pleasantly surprised by what she has to offer as a candidate. And nowhere did I think, oh yeah, she's a lesbian. I mean, to be able to move beyond that and not even have that as part of the picture is where we need to be as a society. Just like I wouldn't look at someone and say, oh yes, they're Asian, or oh yes, she's a woman and she'll be the first whatever. And I know it's that we have to get over our first, but at the same time to be able to focus on what's really real and important is crucial. And I think it's important for the readership too, because again, just saying, yes, she's a trans woman, people will get stuck on that and they won't understand what is a trans woman, what's a trans man, and have they made the transition and are they really he or she, or it just gets really confusing. I think it's important to provide education, and that's what Woven's trying to do. I don't know how the Oklahoman can do that. I don't know what your policy is or how you would go about educating people on these issues and what they mean.
Well, just like we should and aspire to educate anybody about anything. They got cameras that track all the movements of Thunder players during games and get all these stats. So the first time we write about that, and the subsequent times, we certainly need to write about the cameras and what they do, and how, and then when we start talking about Katie running, 6 miles this week, we need to explain to people how you figured out 6 miles. The problem is, if we move on in progress, we leave people back in ignorance, and they think, uh-oh, what does all that mean? They don't understand the process, and they'll never get to the person. So there's this time that we still have to go through. It's a time when everybody has to go, it's like arithmetic or whatever. We have to learn the basics before we can move on to understand the person. This is just sort of the process. And
Just like
anybody,
Obama is black.
just, Jackie Robinson had a process that he had to go through. And they picked him, Branch Rickey picked Jackie Robinson because he knew he could do it. And there was no shortcut to that. And we reap the benefit now because of the process that he went through. We celebrate it. But there was no shortcut in that. And people who go through these things, pioneers, first time, first everything, it's really not like progress to forget. It's not progress if you jump over a step. And we can pretend that Oklahoma is time to jump, but we're not there. And it's our responsibility to, we gotta have an informed citizenry. We don't serve anybody's purpose if we leave out stuff and we skip steps.
That's very true. Do you have a plan on how to educate the readership?
This is a great
How do we
handout,
cover
by the way. I like, this is a great
Does
handout.
anyone know?
This
how do we
is a good, this is
This
a
is
good
start?
step.
Yeah.
And I think, it's great that we're having this discussion and just sitting here thinking, yeah, there's stories we could be doing to not leave people behind in ignorance and inform them about different aspects of the gay community. So that when a person suddenly appears in the spotlight, certain people aren't freaking out about, they're not boogeyman, so to speak, and that's one of the things, the roles I think we play in the media, in our efforts to inform, is to inform the public in a way, so that, a person or an issue doesn't become, or remain scary, so to speak, because let's face it, certain things are scary to people, and they shouldn't be. But how we go forward, yeah, you write things, write stories to inform and to be fair and clear about the issues that we write about. And hopefully we find people in the community who would want to talk to us candidly about who they are and what their concerns are and how things affect them or how they can be effective as well.
Well, I think we also need to do a better job on people who are out there trying to demonize or make those people boogeymen, to kind of fact check them and not just write down everything they say that's completely crazy. I mean, we've got to have some responsibility there. I mean, obviously as a newspaper, we're attracted more to controversy and somewhat more newsworthy, but we can't just be a mouthpiece for people spewing random thoughts every day. I mean, either don't use that or have some context with those comments that they're making. So,
Are you familiar with Grantland and the story of the magic putter? There's a very interesting, does anybody know about that story?
Yeah, that's really interesting.
A side website of ESPN did a story, what is it, a couple months ago?
I think it's, 1 or 2 months ago.
About a transgendered doctor and who had invented a putter that you see if you're an insomniac.
Yeah,
You
it's a late night
saw these commercials, and it started off as a sports story, like, well, it's a very simple question.
What is this putter?
What's the deal with this putter?
Yeah.
What's so magic about it?
What's so magic with it? What's the deal with it? So then the writer just started, and it led them down the path of who is this doctor?
What their
And-
qualifications
And what are their qualifications, what's the science behind it, because it made lots of
We
claims.
found out the person never existed, basically.
And, yeah,
When, I believe, she switched names to become female, she left her old life behind, the old life. And when he discovered that, he asked her about it, and she got very defensive, and it was really, could be a whole entire class on ethics and journalism, this whole issue, because he was just trying to approach her about it, to ask her, you know, how can you give qualifications like this? It kind of spiraled out of control. She committed suicide.
Oh, no.
after the writer, convinced that the writer was writing this story, cooperating, until the point where we've got conflicting things here. And
You needed
then-
clarification.
It needed clarification, and the clarification would out her. And ESPN, boy, if you just want to read about how this could go incredibly wrong. I mean, the worst case scenario, read
They
that
issued
story.
like 3 different apologies, and even admitted in the end they said they didn't do enough research into the LGBT community to know that, you know, just how big of a landmine they had stepped on, really.
Right.
So,
Carla really wants to say something.
No, well, I was just gonna say that, this,
That was-
it's funny, this reminds me, more than 20 years ago, one of my first assignments, which is, it was horrible to think that this is one of my first assignments, but I had to track down a Midwest City police officer who was going through the same thing that Paula did at one time, going from male to female. He had not done that yet. He was wearing a wig and that sort of thing. He was using the men's restroom in the police department, and they were having problems. That's how we found out about it. Well, it ended up being my day. I don't know how I got it, but I ended up having to go try to track him down, and kind of I spent 2 days on it. But I always missed him. I literally was missing him different places, and it turns out he was the ex-husband of my newsroom advisor at Rose State College, which was a interesting twist because she was trying to help me track him down too. Anyway, 90% of me was hoping I did not find him.
Just a step
no
slow,
idea.
rats.
I had no clue. How am I going to? How? I don't want to offend him, and I knew that he was trying to transition, especially after talking to his ex-wife, and it was just, it was a nightmare for me as a reporter. We still did a story, but obviously we didn't have his input. And I never found out what happened because I was just glad that but now, okay, going back, now we're ahead. I did a story on Paul Schonow. It was Paul Schonow, way back when he was a police officer when I was covering City Hall. And people loved him. She is Paula now. They love her now. I interviewed Paula and Pam for my story about same-sex couples wanting to get married in Oklahoma, but they're already married. And the thing about it is I spent like 2 hours with them one night, very, very nice. And she remembered me. And one of the things that she said was she knows that it's hard for people to grasp her story, but she's been out there in the public eye enough now to where, you know, she knows that it's hard for people, but this is her reality. It may seem funny to a lot of different people, but she knows that this is what her life is, and she's okay with it. Okay, here's the thing. I don't think we can do a story on her without going into that. I think we, right now, where we are, because I agree with you, Mike, we're doing disservice to our readers and to her not to kind of go into that whole idea of, I'm putting myself out there. She already has been out, but this is like, she's putting herself out in an even bigger way. And she has so many stories, and that's one of the reasons why I didn't include her in my story about same-sex couples wanting to do that, and I wanted to, but I told her, I said, your story and the fact that they got married under her male name, because that's the only way they could do it in another state, all of that is like a whole different, issue. And so they're not sure if they're going to get married or not in Oklahoma. Anyway,
It's like married priests.
Well, it's
They
just.
got married, then became priests.
Right, right. So anyway, but I told her that they have such an interesting story to tell. She has such an interesting story to tell about coming to acceptance, about how she realized that many of her police officer friends and many of her co-workers in Oklahoma City had moved or segued into or evolved into another way of thinking about what she was doing. And then she talks about a neighbor that they had who talked about this police officer named Paul that she loved, Officer Paul, that's what they used to call him. And this lady had lived next door to them for like maybe a year or two before that someone finally told her, you realize that that officer that you're talking about, that is your neighbor, Paula. And so those stories
That's a
need to be
great
told.
story.
They need to be told, but in the context of, now that she's brought this up, and it's so funny because we made the decision, my editors and I made the decision, we were going to leave her out of this story for same-sex marriages because her story is so much bigger. And within that same time frame, she decided to run for office. So I'm like, oh, good, okay, because now that story can be told in such a big way. Do you understand what I'm saying? I'm not saying that
Absolutely.
it's not. We shouldn't have progressed. I agree, but she has such a story to tell.
She really
And I think
does.
she's willing to do it. And it'll take someone here who's willing to do that and tell those stories and be sensitive. But I think our readers will appreciate it too. Some of them may not agree, with what her decision and how all of that shaped up, but she has an amazing story.
Well, she told me some amazing stories yesterday about just different experiences she had as Officer Paul and then later as Officer Paula, but working with this same particular neighborhood. And she became very close to a group of moms who were very concerned about their sons who were in and out of jail. And Paula got involved over the years, first as Officer Paul and then later after her transition. And the moms still relied on her and still had an amazing relationship with her, even though, you would expect they would have a difficult time. But they didn't. They saw her heart. They saw the way she operated, the way she was so sincere about really wanting the best for their sons who were just floating around in and out of jail. And so, stories like that of how the impact that Paula's had on the community, I think are so important. Again, speak to her character and why she wants to run for public office. I mean, I can't even imagine running for public office. I mean, that's just, I think it's such a nightmare to have to get out there on a personal level and open up. And the fact she's doing that, I think, is tremendously courageous. And again, being a first, I think it's a huge task.
But in her case, she has, there's so many areas you can go into. The aspect of Carla's story or hopeful story about the marriage, how she could get married. The impact of their existence without the laws to support them. That she had to get married under his name. It's weird,
So did she never change?
Well, she couldn't. Here's the thing. I know this is why we didn't add that into
the
our
legal
story, our
aspects are
30-inch
just
story.
The
mind-boggling.
legal are, yes, and it's like that for so many people in the LGBT community, and that's why Woven exists, because there's so many issues, especially with transgender individuals, wanting to do simple things like get a new driver's license that reflects their real gender, not the gender they were born with, but what they considered their real gender. And so, like in Paula's case, she, I'm sure, would love to have a driver's license saying she's female because she is. However, she was born and her birth certificate says male. So without being able to change her birth certificate, which she can't, then she can't change the rest of her documents. And then, she did decide to go to Texas to legally marry Pam for many reasons, but again, she had to fall back on what she feels is a false gender on her birth certificate in order to legally marry. And so it's just sad. It's a sad
What have we been reporting
compromise.
as the legal name? And sorry, I'm thinking like a copy editor. What have we been reporting as the legal name in the candidate listings?
Well, in this,
What name's gonna be on the ballot?
yeah, in this case, it'll have to be what she wants, I guess.
Yeah, and her campaign name is Paula
But is that fair
Sophia.
to, I mean, but is that,
Can you run on a
we,
name that's
I
not
don't
legally
think
Well,
we
again,
let candidates, it's a little bit different when it's political coverage though. There's a little bit
Yeah,
different standard.
absolutely.
Yes.
And is there a legal precedent? I mean,
So maybe that,
what does the state say
Yeah.
she has to run
Yeah.
as?
Oh, is she great? Yeah. Maybe that's the story.
See, there's so many aspects here, and part of this discussion was to flush out some of these, hopefully, ideas too, which we're hearing now, or issues that are out there.
There are so many
This is
legal
This is
issues.
a typical, to me, this is such a hot spot. I mean,
And hopefully you can use
Yeah.
Woven as a resource, because we
Yeah.
have a number of articles telling the story of people
Voters
dealing
want
with
to go
these
look up the
things.
candidate on
So
OSCN.
maybe you
Are
can use it
serving
as a
them if we give
resource.
them a nickname? We don't, I mean, we put nicknames in parentheses. Well, there's that Billy Blue Jeans, whatever, who's run for everything and goes by Blue Jeans. Everybody calls her Blue Jeans,
I mean, like,
but we give the full.
Her gender.
like, it's not a nickname.
Oh,
But think about serving the reader is what I'm saying.
I understand. I'm wondering how she has to.
Well, Blue Jeans isn't on the ballot.
I'm not arguing with you there, I don't know how she had the file.
we have a question here. If you can put a name on a ballot, that's not legally a name.
I'm sure you
Did she
can.
legally change her name to Paula Sophia?
I didn't ask her that, and I know there are some cases right now here in Oklahoma of transgender individuals trying to get a name change and they're not able to. And it has to do with whether or not they've had surgery. I'll have to go and revisit the cases because, again, Woven's national in scope, so sometimes I get my states confused. But I know there are cases right now that there's not been a decision. I know that this is an ongoing battle for a lot of people who are trying to, one, change their documents and also change their names. And it also is a relevant issue, too, just among same-sex couples. I spoke with a man, in fact, we wrote a story about him on Woven, who wanted so much to change his last name to match his husband's and just really wanted to do that. And it became this legal nightmare and literally having to stand before a judge and plead for this change. And that's not something that, a lot of people would even think about or it would even occur to them as being an issue. So there's so many hoops and so many legal issues that people have to go through in the LGBT community that are a real nightmare that the general public may not be aware of. So there's so many stories, I think, that you could focus on to bring these issues to life for people.
I've got one more question before we wrap up. Do you see any laws in Oklahoma that will eventually become friendly anytime soon to issues like this?
Well, I hope so. I mean, it will definitely take a lot of time. And what we've seen on a federal basis is that, certainly DOMA was struck down and that impacted, several different agencies. But they've all reacted at different speeds. So, the IRS may do one thing and another, federal agency may do another thing. But everyone's leading down the same path. And I think what will really change things, obviously, is next year. I really feel like a decision will be made regarding same-sex marriage at the Supreme Court level. And so we'll have to kind of wait and see what happens there. And then there will be a trickle-down effect. But I don't know. That there's so much complexity to this. And when you talk about the difference between the federal level and then the state level and how different states have different laws regarding everything from name changes to same-sex marriage, it's really confusing. And again, what Woven's trying to do is to cut through all that and provide education so that it's clear for people and so that people know how to protect themselves. And again, I hope you'll use it as a resource because we do have a lot of articles on there that might be relevant to the audience that you have here in the Oklahoman.
I looked at the website and yeah, it's a good place to get story ideas for that matter. So we appreciate it. Any other questions?
Well, I would just say like the flip side of the thing about the ballot would be if the state insists on using Paul, then the people who want to go vote for Paula Sophia wouldn't see what they want to see either. So I mean, I think there's a double-edged sword there. I'm not saying that I'm like, no, it has to be. I don't.
Right.
So
I don't know how they have to, how she has to file, that's really,
Yeah, and I didn't ask her, because again, I didn't get into the, well, I didn't get into the political side when I was talking with her yesterday. I was strictly talking about, you know, her personal life, so I didn't get into that, but I think that's fascinating and definitely something. What? Yeah, yeah. She's great. She's so approachable, but I just want to thank all of you for this opportunity, and I would love to be of help. I'd love to be a resource, and if there are questions that I can't answer, I will find the answers for you. So I'm here. I'm right around the corner at Britton and Kelly. So anytime you all need me, just holler.
Thank you very much.
Sure. Thank you.